Hi, everyone. My good friend Greg Zweber and I sat down 2 weeks ago to discuss fatherhood. If you missed it, or if you're new to this initiative, Greg ditched the rat race. The work-life eubiosis is chronicling significant portions of his professional gap year as he RVs around the U.S. with his family. The first part of their trip was pre-planned, but they were holding their plans loosely for this entire year to embrace the adventure and to remain flexible to the unknown. In Greg's own words, he says they have been racing the wind. One of the destinations for Greg was to return home to his family this summer. However, they had to make a detour to return home sooner than expected due to the declining health of Greg's father. They arrived just in time to spend a week with Greg's dad before he went home to be with the Lord. In this conversation, Greg and I talk about the experience of saying goodbye to a parent, and then we also reflect on the deeper meaning of family, building a legacy, and the power of building simple habits for fathers. Often, more is caught than taught. This was the theme of the conversation. Fathers, and also mothers, are our children's first role models. Kids often pay more attention to what we do than what we say. This lesson is one that I'm still learning from how my dad, who journeyed through this world for 74 years, walked this earth. May God bless his soul. The powerful and emotional conversation with Greg ends with a discussion on the mantra tattooed on his arm. And I would argue that this is also tattooed on his heart. Live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. We'll be right back. You are listening to the Work-Life Eubiosis podcast with your host, Charleston Edwards. If this is your first time here, welcome. My goal is simple: to eradicate burnout and to bring harmony, purpose, and balance to this world, starting with the family. My hope is that this show and the story shared will provide encouragement and ideas that will be valuable to you on your journey to work-life freedom. So let's dive in to today's episode. Greg, welcome back to the show. The last time we pressed record, you were in northern Arizona. And over the last 2 months, you have seen a lot of amazing things, from Arizona to Utah to Colorado. From following the pictures on Facebook, you have had some bucket list experiences. And one day I would love to deep dive in that, but you have had a detour, and now you're back in Minnesota. And when this recording goes live, it's Father's Day. So today I want to dedicate our conversation to talking about fatherhood and everything that has transpired. So I'm going to give the mic to you just to tell me a snapshot of the last 2 months and where you're at right now, and then we'll dive into fatherhood.
Yeah, so I don't know if bucket list things is correct because we didn't have any intention of being in Arizona or Utah originally. The winds took us that way when we were in New Mexico, and so we kind of fled some really, really bad storms and winds. We had planned on going through Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then to Colorado was a destination we knew to see some family, both my wife and I's. But we ended up in Arizona because of the wind in New Mexico, well, El Paso, Texas, and New Mexico. And we went to places that, I'd been to Tucson. I think I've been to Phoenix, in a hotel for a conference or something like that. But yeah, I ended up spending quite a bit of time in Arizona and then in southern Utah especially. And it was amazing. Saw places, southern Utah. You hear about all the national parks and things there, but it is every day we're like, well, that's the coolest thing I've seen. And then the next day it'd be like, well, that's the coolest thing I've seen. Going through Bryce Canyon and Zion and Canyonland and Arches National Park, just some beautiful, beautiful geography, topography, and unbelievable 20 million year old rocks. So, um, I'm glad the wind came in El Paso and we went that way. I'm sure we'd had a great time in Albuquerque and Santa Fe too. But yeah, then spent a little bit of time in Colorado with Nicole's uncle and her cousin and my niece and her husband. And then had planned on spending a couple weeks, 2.5 weeks or so with just my wife and I, because my father-in-law flew back from from Denver to be able to see his granddaughter, Nicole's niece, play some softball before the season was over. So Nicole and I started that in northern Colorado for a few days, and then we headed to South Dakota. Planned on spending a couple weeks there by ourselves, and then my dad was in the hospital and talked to my brothers, and we were planning on being back in Minnesota by March 18th, which was going to be May 18th, to celebrate my parents' 70th anniversary. And my brother told me that maybe not very likely that my dad was going to make it to that. Just said my dad's been healthy and was 94 and lived a great life, but his heart was just giving up. And so Nicole and I hightailed it back from Southwest South Dakota in one day, made a long drive, and glad we did, because we got to help get my dad out of the hospital the day after we got back, and then spend I don't know, 5 or 6 days every moment really with my dad, and kind of helping him with the things that he needed as they put him on hospice in the home here. But it was great. 5 days of praying with my dad and being with my mom, and at one time or another, all 12 of my, or all 11 of my siblings, all 12 of us were here with dad before he passed, and he passed very peacefully and ready to go home, as he said to the Lord, in his own home where he was born, in that house, and died in that house. So it was a blessing to be able to do that. If I think about, if we weren't on this trip, obviously I would have taken off of work and flown home for that. But the way it all happened, and just so happened we were close enough to be in South Dakota and make that whatever 14-hour drive that day, and be back here, and then now have the camper here where we are on my mom and dad's farm, where we planned on staying anyways. But it's been a true blessing to be here with my mom every day since, and it was even more of a blessing to be here those last 5 or 6 days with my dad before he passed. So here we are in Minnesota for the summer. Most of the time we'll spend here at my parents' home, but we're going to do some treks out. We spent the Memorial Day weekend at my wife's family farm, not too far from here, and we got some things we'll go spend a few days or a week in some different spots. But it's really comforting to be here with my mom every day. I've been blessed to go with her to daily mass every day and go do the rosary at 7:35 every morning before 8 o'clock mass. But it's been great to be there with her in church, because she did that every single day with my dad for, well, I don't know how long they've been going to daily mass, a long, long time of their 70 years. So been a true blessing to be able to be here with her.
I'm sure it's a precious time for her, for you to be able to be there to fill a huge void in her life and helping her through this season of grief and reflection.
Yeah, it's, I've been asking her almost, well, not daily anymore, but the first few days for sure, like, do you want to be alone at all, or would you like me or Nicole to be in the house with you? And the first few nights, somebody slept there, whether it was me or one of my sisters, or one of my brothers was here. So it's kind of like she had the comfort of knowing someone was there with her. And every time I've asked her, hey, do you want us, we can go out to the camper, spending the evenings with her. And she's like, no, I think it'd be good if you stayed. So we've been able to spend that time with her in the evenings, usually both Nicole and I. And then again, I've had that 2-hour time period with her every morning, and going into the house before, and then going to church with her for the hour or whatever it takes to do that. And so we'll continue to do that until she tells us not to. And I'm actually going to be gone this weekend to go to up north with some friends of mine. But either Nicole will be around, or I'm going to ask one of my siblings to be around. If my mom wants that, I'll ask her today. So it's being one of 12 kids has lots of blessings. Sometimes it's some hiccups with things, but the beauty is there's 11 others that can come spend some time with her if she wants somebody to be here, all the time or most of the time. So yeah, I, I think I think she's doing well with it, and knowing that Dad died so peacefully and that he's in a better place now with not that his health was bad, but he just couldn't do the things that my dad wanted to do and did up until he was, up until like 3 months ago. My dad was doing all the stuff that he has always done in service to others, all sort, the list is like exhausting, all the stuff that he did and almost on a daily basis was, volunteering or helping somebody out. And he just didn't have the energy to do that anymore. And it broke his heart that he couldn't. So I think that was part of maybe his heart shutting down a little bit too, is that it didn't have that spirit of, volunteerism and giving back to others just because he couldn't physically do it because of a lack of energy.
I can't imagine um, living into my 90s and being so active. What was your dad's secret to staying so energized and involved into his 90s?
Well, I just think it was part of his soul. He's a farmer, so ever since he retired from farming, he's got to occupy his time. He's not someone who's going to sit around and watch TV for a few hours every day, or he's not a big reader besides reading a bunch of Bible and then some farm magazines or whatever. So, some of it was just healthy for his soul to occupy his time and not be bored as someone who worked many days of his life from 4 a.m. to 7 p.m., as a dairy farmer. So, and I think it's just always been a part of who he is, that realizing no matter what their financial situation or what it was, and there's many ups and downs with that, with being a dairy farmer for, 50 years of, that he always realized he had it pretty dang good, and that, it was his duty to give back, whether that's money or time or, whatever that was. So I'm not sure, but it was, be able to do it in his 90s is, he got up and walked every day. In the summer, he would go walk a couple of miles outside. In the winter, he'd walk on the treadmill. And I think I've shared this with you. He had a heart attack and should have died 15, 16 years ago. Mm. And I think that really rejuvenated him too, to say, wow, I could have been gone already. And so I shared in the eulogy at my dad's service, the quote from Jimmy Carter. I don't have it memorized, but it's about, it's my duty and my faith demands that I do what I can, wherever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I can. I'm paraphrasing there, but it's pretty close. Yeah. And I don't think my dad ever maybe heard that quote or whatever, but he truly embraced it. It was like he felt it was his duty, and his faith demanded that he do that, so he did.
You've already said just his work ethic, the way he was able to volunteer and give himself to others. What made him a good father to you and your siblings?
It's kind of weird, because as I've reflected on that, either, before the few days before he died and after, it's like I didn't play catch with my dad until about 3 years ago, ever, right? And I have that recorded, thank God. Excuse me for a second.
No, you're fine.
So he wasn't that dad that was at every one of my games or doing all that stuff, but what he did by example. And let me go back. I never felt neglected by my dad. I had 11 siblings to play catch with. So, but what he did by example, especially with, I would say, his faith and being a father or being a spouse, simple things that I saw and I try to do, and I don't do it all the time like he does, but like opening the door for my mom, all the time, never miss. And you think about stuff like that after 70 years, you might go, she can open her own door. No, that's so, I mean, it was, to me, he was a tremendous father because he just showed me. And I can't think of many things. There's a few things that my dad told me that really stuck with me, but everything he did has stuck with me, and to realize, how fortunate I am and we are, the vast majority of people, in our country, how fortunate we are to have food, clothing, and shelter and an opportunity to express our faith, which we take for granted, but a lot of people in the world can't do that. So, you know, it's not a lot of those things that he actually did one-on-one with me or whatever, but it was just he gave us an example of what it means to love your spouse, to love your kids, to love God, and how to act because of those three things.
The best lessons in life are better caught than taught.
Yeah, I love that line. It's my dad would say talk is cheap, action is powerful. So, the other thing is my dad would make snide remarks about like, well, nobody's ever even thanked me for mowing the lawn at the church for 10 years and mowing the lawn at the school for 20 years. But really, he didn't really want the public acknowledgement of it. Um, the school wrote a beautiful thing in their Facebook post about being the silent guardian, and you did the stuff when nobody was watching type of stuff. So again, to me, that's a lot of what I've embraced. And like, I don't want somebody to pat me on the back because I do whatever it is. I just want people to maybe see that and maybe follow it a little bit too. And my dad certainly was a prime example of like lead by example. And, all I had to do was kind of mimic him especially as a spouse, maybe as a father. I was much more involved with my kids directly because one, I didn't have 12 kids, and two, I wasn't dairy farming and having to work, 14 hours a day. So, that's a long answer to your question, but it's, he led by example.
Have we lost the spirit of volunteerism and hard work as a culture?
I don't know. I think people do it when you think about, our connection to big brothers, big sisters. I would guess that it's harder today to recruit a mentor than it was 10 years ago, or for me, I guess 15 years ago when I was doing it on a daily basis at the local level. I don't know if that's a generational thing or whatever, but I think that people try to figure out where they have time or if they have time and then say, I'll volunteer rather than just saying, I'm going to volunteer. And you just figure out the logistics of it, right? Especially with being a big brother or big sister, right? You'll say, I feel like I'm back in my sales mode of like, don't do anything different. Just do everything you're already doing. Just include a kid once a week for an hour. So I don't know. I hope that that's not true. And I think we've had bursts of things. I think today is the anniversary of George Floyd. That inspired lots of stuff with lots of people. I don't know necessarily about volunteering, but there's wake up calls on some of that stuff, right? And I think, unfortunately, those are getting fewer and far between where there's that, inspiration or call to action or people are like, I need to do something for somebody else. And I don't know who that is or what that is or how that comes, but I'm hoping that there's one big one of those again. Think about like the bucket challenge, whenever that was 5-10 years ago, right? Like everybody did that thing and they raised millions of dollars for that. I think we need something like that on a bigger scale to motivate the masses again. And I hope the answer to your question is not, no, we're on a downhill decline, and that's going to stay that way for volunteerism. But we'll see. We'll see.
What are some of your most cherished traditions as a family, and how much did your parents influence those traditions?
Yeah, so for me, it's a lot. It's a lot around the holidays and really getting everybody together. And when we talk about that, like everybody for us with all the kids, grandkids, and great grandkids, if they show up, that's over 100 people at Christmas. And most years, I would say the vast majority, there'd always be somebody that couldn't make it or whatever, or not all the great grandkids would be there or whatever. But for a lot of years, it was everybody at my brother's, and in the big, huge 6-car garage was full of people, and the house is full of people and stuff. So, I mean, kind of embracing that, how unique that is to be able to get that many people together, and mostly because most of my siblings haven't ventured very far. I was easily by far the farthest away in Florida for 10 years. And then I had a sister who was in Kansas City for a while, but now she lives back here. And then my other sibling that's farthest away is 3 hours away in Wisconsin. So the beauty of whatever that is, maybe it was the farm mentality of, you stay close and small communities are beautiful, but all the rest of my siblings, including myself, until we moved to Florida, we were 30 minutes away with it too. But the beauty of being able to say, well, let's just drive over to mom and dad's or to grandma and grandpa's, and we're only half an hour, 2 hours away. And I don't know, the bonding that comes with that. And there'd be times when I would be saying goodbye at a Christmas party, and I'd be like, "Oh, I didn't even get a chance to talk to you today. Hi, goodbye," which is a kind of a strange but beautiful thing. And knowing that, I spent the 4 hours or 5 hours, whatever, talking with all my other siblings or my nieces and nephews or whoever that was. So that's the one that stands out the most. And for the last 10 years while we were gone, something that I regret, but it's kind of the logistics of it. We didn't make it back, but they pretty much celebrated, I think, the last 5 years for sure, maybe 10 years of every year for my parents on their birthdays because, at 94, 90, my mom will soon be 93. You don't know how many more you're going to have, right? And now we won't have any more for my dad. But the tradition of doing that and taking the time, and again, the convenience of everybody being close enough to be able to say, hey, let's do that. So, I mean, those are the biggest ones that I can think of, is just kind of those traditions of getting together and everybody making it a priority to get there, unless they really had something vastly more important going on.
I know this year is a reset year for you, and now being at home for the last couple of weeks, do you foresee a world where you're moving back home?
Oh, we don't, no clue to that yet. I mean, we really haven't gotten to the point of thinking about, what's next for us in either a permanent or semi-permanent, situation. So we're leaving that open. We have plans. We had planned on taking basically this whole year off before worrying about it or thinking about it, unless we ended up spending a bunch more money than we thought, which we haven't yet. So we're still just in the mode of let's let 2025 play out. Probably more towards this fall and things when we're planning on leaving here sometime in July and going up through Canada and then down into the Wyoming and Montana into the state or the national parks there, and then out to Seattle to see my daughter. I would think by the time we get out to Seattle, we might have somewhat of a plan, or at least talked about what might be next for us for residents. I mean, I think we'll end up in Florida, some part of the year for sure. I think we'll end up back in Minnesota for, some part of the summers, or we don't know yet. And we may end up somewhere else. It's kind of I don't think that scares either one of us. I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is like, well, who knows where we might run across and go like, hey, this might be a nice spot to be. But I can tell you this experience with, being around here with my siblings and my mom through my dad's coming home and passing has been, it's really comforting that we're here, and we had planned on being here anyway. So, family's a huge draw for me. So, if we end up spending a little more time in Minnesota each year, that's a possibility, but that's got to be worked out with two of us, not just me. So we'll see.
You mentioned being able to spend the last 5 days of your father's life with him. Did he leave you with any advice or share any wisdom?
The thing that stuck with me the most, and he repeated it after he got home, whether it was with me personally or me and my brother Den, who were, kind of being the primary care providers, or, for the majority of the time, is when, so it was, he was in the hospital for 5-6 days before we brought him home. And I called him, I think it was the day before, or 2 days before. It might have been the day we were driving back. I can't remember. And asked him how he was doing that day. And he said, okay, but I'm ready to go home. And I said, well, Dad, you got to wait till the doctors give you the okay to get out of there. And he said, I'm not talking about going home to the farm. He said, I'm talking about going home to the Lord, and I'm ready. He repeated that to either my siblings or some really close friends from church that were here in his last few days. And he spoke until the day before he died. So he was cognizant, and that's such a blessing with it. But he told people that came, he goes, I don't have any cancer. I don't have any dementia. I've been married to my lovely bride for 70 years. I've lived 94 great years. What else can a guy ask for? So I think, again, that's words of wisdom to me about recalling his blessings. That some of that was a day and a half or 2 days before he died, and having that complete peace and comfort in knowing, he did whatever he could, wherever he could, with whatever he had, and his faith allowing him to know, hey, I'm going to be going to a better place here. Even though I told him, he corrected me and I said, you're going straight to heaven. He goes, nobody goes straight to heaven. You got to go to purgatory. So again, true Catholic belief, right? Doesn't matter. You could be the Pope. When the Pope died, which was ironic, it happened right around when my dad, well, actually the new Pope was named, but, my dad said, nope, nobody goes straight to heaven. I got to go to purgatory. And I joked with him. I said, well, they'll probably scan your wrist or something and you'll be there for about 5 seconds and they'll send you on. But again, being grounded in that faith with, we joke with some of my siblings and some other folks are like, if he's not in heaven, I got no shot. But my dad wouldn't say that, he's grounded in the fact that, his faith tells him, nope, there's a spot. You go to purgatory and you pay your debts. I'm not so sure I completely understand purgatory yet. But to be that grounded, a day and a half or 2 days before, I'm sure he knew he was dying, without saying that, but just to be completely at peace with that and have the comfort in knowing that, he did what he was supposed to do. And I'm sure if he took a pit stop in purgatory, he's in heaven now and, not feeling any of that lack of, it really for him was a lack of oxygen and things that caused him, his heart to struggle and not get the circulation to his organs, which, shut him down. So, that his faith was certainly deep and profound of, he believed that he did the things that he needed to do as a father, as a spouse, and as a member of the community to be at peace with death. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
It's a rarity. And I know we talked about this last week. My father, a week before he passed, he died of a heart attack. At the age of 74, he gave a Sunday school lesson about the leaning tree is not the first to fall. And the whole analogy around that was being okay with death and being at peace with death and not taking tomorrow for granted. And I know that's one of the values that we talk about.
Yeah.
Of being humble to life, being humble to knowing that we don't have full control, that it's our good Lord that has ultimate control of our future.
Yeah.
Do you see a connection between humility and that peace with God?
Well, so a quote that I shared in the eulogy too, it's something my brother-in-law shared with Nicole and I in this past year when we were talking with him about some changes he's going through in life. And he said, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of not having lived. And I shared that in the eulogy because I think that truly is what the way Dad thought. He had no fear of death because he was at peace with it. And he certainly, I think, died peacefully knowing that he had fully lived and had no fear of not having lived. So, I don't know if that comes with humility or if it comes with just the faith that follow God's word, which I think he did to a T, and then knowing that there's the reward for that with eternal life. So, tell me more about your dad. I mean, we focus way too much on me here. Tell me about what your dad taught you, or what sticks with you, and what still sticks with you. I think 20 years later, right? Almost.
Yeah, my dad was a hard worker, but didn't overwork. He knew his boundaries. He was a man of very few words. Going back to what we talked about earlier, he taught his lessons by modeling. I enjoyed just being with him. If that was mowing the yard, riding in the car, watching a football game. He was a man of routine. You knew where he was at 10 a.m. in the morning. You knew where he was at 1 p.m. when he was reading his Bible from 1 o'clock to 1:30 before he'd take a nap before going to work, second shift. Um, you knew the exact minute he would walk in the house from his work. It was just pattern after pattern after pattern. Growing up, you take that for granted. Just these mundane routines that don't mean anything, you think, at the moment, but fast forward 40 some years and you realize the consistency, the loyalness, the faithfulness of the mundane habits stick. And I find myself craving those same simplicities of life and how I can also be a model of consistency to my kids walking in at the same time, or being caught reading my Bible, or being caught washing the dishes. My dad washed the dishes. He was the dishwasher in the home. He never complained. He saw a dirty dish, he took care of it. Right. And it was those little things that make a big impact. So that was my dad, and he is still with me to this day, and it's been since 2012. And, I often reflect that I can do better. I'm not a perfect dad. I'm not a perfect human being. But that is part of the point of life, is being on a journey to not being perfect, but being better than you were the day before.
There's two things that made me think of, and thanks for sharing that. So a beautiful thing, can't remember where it was. It might have been at the funeral. I'm not even sure. Someplace when my son Grady was here, and he beat me to it of opening the door for my mom. And, that made me think what my dad did reflected in me, and then that's reflected in my son. And I didn't ask him to do it. And I've never told him, I don't think, make sure you're opening the door for whatever, your mother, your girlfriend, whatever. He just did it. And so that, action speaks louder words. What you're talking about, how he modeled that is huge. And the other thing it made me remind me of is like your dad's habits and things. I think about when I said, hey, I didn't play catch with my dad until he was 91 or 92, I think. I didn't feel deprived of that. And we were talking with my siblings about, we used to do it all the time. We have two lakes that are, both of them are about 15, maybe 20 miles away from the farm here we grew up. And I can't remember a single day, either we were milking cows with him or we were doing something else and he'd come in from doing that. And again, he's starting every day at 4:20. I think he woke up every day, milking at 4:30 in those days. But no matter what, he'd already put in 15 hours at 6:30, 14, 15 hours at 6:30 when he'd done milking. And if we said, hey, Dad, can we go to the lake? I don't ever remember him saying no. So he'd come in, change into his shorts, boom, we're gone. And it didn't matter whether sunset was going to be in 20 minutes or, 20 minutes being exaggerated. So if sunset was an hour, he wouldn't say, no, sunset's going to be an hour. No, we'd go to the lake for 20 minutes. And then almost every time we got to go to the Dairy Queen in Prior Lake, Minnesota and get a peanut butter parfait for 79 cents. And so that's a memory that, I can hold, whether it was, I remember doing it when it was the younger kids, 3, 4, 5 of us going. I don't remember doing that when I was little and doing it with 12 of us or 10 of us or whatever. But the beauty of him, he could have said, I just got done working 15 hours. I'm tired. Is it? No, I don't ever remember one time him saying that. And so to have that dedication to his craft, and what he had to do, it's kind of the beast of being a dairy farmer. You can't say, I'm not going to milk the cows this morning or tonight. You're stuck with it. But it would have been so easy for him to say, not today, son. I don't, and maybe he did, but I don't ever remember that. I can only remember him saying, get your swim trunks, hop in the car. So, there's not a ton of times where, and I don't have a regret of it. I mean, I can only remember my dad being at like 1 or 2 baseball games when I was growing up. And I can only remember him being at 1 basketball game when I was in high school. But I don't have any regrets for that. It wasn't like he was saying, "Wow, I'm going to go to the bar or I'm going to do something with my buddies." He was working, he was farming. So there's a peace and a beauty in that too. And again, seeing that reflection of action in my son was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed.
That's powerful. It speaks to me, and I think this will speak to any of the people listening to this conversation right now, of your father not saying no, but finding every opportunity to say yes, even after a long 14-hour day of being able to say yes to his kids. I personally feel a little bit of guilt, right? Like I'm going to reflect on that. And my kids ask me a lot of questions when I come home from work. And so often I say, not today, or, hey, how about tomorrow, or a recommendation. So I'm challenged. I'm challenged by that story to really rethink my responses. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's a little more. I mean, it's just logistics, right? You figure it out. But my two kids are in Florida and one's in Seattle, and we're in Minnesota. So how do you do something daily? But it hit me too if I need to be better, and I haven't yet. So it's a commitment for me to be better about, speaking to my kids more often and seeing what I can do for them or whatever it is too. It's funny because one of my siblings joked that he didn't do it because he wanted to take you to the lake. He wanted to go get a peanut butter parfait. And I said, bull, that might be the case. He wanted to go get a peanut butter parfait. But, and the funny thing is my dad, I don't remember my dad getting to the lake very often. He would sit down and probably just be like, whew, thank God I can sit in peace for a minute. And we'd be in the water. And if we wanted to be in there till sundown, he never said, come on, let's go. I never remember him saying, time to go. It was always whenever usually it was when the sun went down, like, okay, time to go get a peanut butter parfait. But just that maybe it was his calm and peace that he had sitting there watching one or two or three of his kids, playing joyfully in the water. But, he like, again, I don't ever remember him saying no. And maybe it was because he wanted a peanut butter parfait, but I think that was just a side bonus. I think I've shared this with you before. I think I have. I think maybe because I have it tattooed on my arm, but I shared that as part of my dad's eulogy too. But the more I've thought about it, it's like how easy is it just if you do those five things, but you live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. And the more I think about that, since I put that in there and included in the eulogy and reflected on it afterwards, like there's really nothing else you have to do in life if you do those five things. And my dad embraced every single one of those, and wholeheartedly, especially the last of like, you can't do everything. He knew that, but it's like, well, I'll leave that to God. But he lived the simplest life. Never. I don't think he ever drove a new car in his life. They've lived in the same farm he didn't, need another house or all those things. Things meant nothing to him. And anybody who knew him know the speak kindly, care deeply, love generously was just part of who he was as a human being. So I have thought about that phrase every morning when I wake up and say, thank you, God, for letting me wake up today. And, think about how I can live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. So, that's, again, he did that through actions, and more than he did with words. So I think both our dads were models of things both of us need to challenge ourselves and get back to it, brother.
Right. That's right. Well, let's close out. If it's one piece of wisdom, other than the wisdom that you just shared about the five phrases to live by, what's one piece of wisdom that you would give to not only fathers, but any parent? Listen.
Well, a lot of what we've talked about with this journey with it is, don't use the excuse of I can't. I think if you start anything with I can't mentality, if we would have started that thought process a year ago, well, whenever it was, more than a year ago now, of I can't go on this trip, or I can't quit my job as CEO of Campfire, or I can't sell my house, because whatever, the things you can lock yourself into, you got to think about, like, what if, Or, I think we talked about one time, why ask why? Why ask why not? Why not do this now? And we have shared with you, I have zero regrets. There's been 0 days where I thought, what an idiot, you gave up that great job, or you're an idiot, your house is going to continue to, whatever, all those things. I have zero regret. I'm pretty sure Nicole would say the same thing. The beauty of being able to spend the time that I have with her and her dad and the places we've seen. So I would just challenge people to think why not rather than why, when you're thinking about whether it's something bold like what we did or are doing, or whether it's something simple. Why not? You don't know whether we're going to be here tomorrow, and do it today.
You're an inspiration. You continue to be an inspiration even up to this point. I appreciate just being a little fly on the wall and privileged to call you a friend. Thank you. And
right back at you, man. I feel the same way. So you don't remember how much you inspired me with your Own Your 5 to 9, and just be getting back to that. Let your faith guide you, and that we're just followers here, and it's not all up to us. And again, the experience with my dad over the last month has solidified that for me. But a lot of that started obviously from my dad, but you've reinforced that with me over the last, whatever it is, 2 or 3 years of you and I connecting more frequently. So thank you for doing it. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Anyone that's listening to this, happy Father's Day, and go out and hug your kids.
Yeah. Hug your dad, hug your kids.
All right. Thank you, Greg.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Work-Life Eubiosis podcast, part of the Work-Life resources created by Own Your 5 to 9. I hope that you have found encouragement and a few ideas to strengthen your journey to purpose, freedom, and balance. Have you overcome burnout and found a new way of life? Millions around the globe are still at the risk of burnout and losing it all. And your story may be the one that sparks not only a dream, but action. Visit ownyour5to9.com for more information and submit your story. While you're there, join the Work-Life Eubiosis newsletter and receive additional resources weekly right to your inbox. If you enjoy this podcast, take time to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Share it with a friend or loved one. Remember, the most important organization in the world is the family. Let's do our part to strengthen it. Thank you for listening.